Hi 5th grade, it's Mrs. Daly and I'm going to start our new read aloud. I have selected this book because I love this author and I thought we just needed a fun adventure story. He is J.A. White. The book is called Nightbooks and it's fantastic. I hope you really like it. This author also wrote one of my favorite series, the Thickety series, and I could not stop reading these books. I love the way that he writes, and if you end up liking this book, he wrote this series and they are all just amazing. This is A Path Begins. I'll just go through the books. The Whispering Trees, Well of Witches, and The Last Spell. So these books are just so much fun. If you end up really liking the Nightbooks, please let me know, and maybe I'll do the Thickety next as a read aloud. We will be doing a historical fiction read aloud, but I just couldn't pass up starting just for fun reading. So while you are listening to this book, if you want to draw and if you create any art about this book or that was inspired by this book, please share it with me. I would love to see it. So we're going to get started. And I just love the way that this book is made. It's got these pages that are all black in there. It just kind of adds a little excitement. And here we go. Move my books aside. All right. Chapter 1. The Wrong Floor. After his family had finally fallen asleep, Alex slung the backpack over his shoulder and snuck out of the apartment, easing the front door gently home so it didn't slam shut. The 8th floor hallway looked drearier than ever without any sunlight coming through its small windows. Alex lingered on the doormat, fighting the urge to return to his warm, comfortable bed. If you do that, he thought, you'll still be the same old Alex Mosher tomorrow. Weirdo. Freak. Loser. Is that what you want? No, he whispered. Before he could change his mind, Alex started towards the elevator at the end of the hall. During the day, snippets of his neighbors' lives leaked through the thin doors. Muffled conversations, the loud blare of televisions, Mrs. Garcia's son practicing his violin. At this time of night, however, the hallway was nearly silent. The only sounds were a grimy light bulb that buzzed like an angry hornet and a soft rustling from Alex's backpack, as though its contents were struggling to escape their fate. Sorry, Alex thought, feeling a wave of guilt. I wish I didn't have to do this, but it's better this way. He reached the elevator and pressed the down button on the cracked panel. Far below him, ancient gears squealed away the silence. Alex winced and peeked over his shoulder, hoping that the sound didn't wake any of his neighbors. The stairs would have been the quieter option, but Alex wanted to reach his destination as quickly as possible so he didn't have an opportunity to second-guess his decision. Ding! The elevator doors jerked open with a pained squeak. Smudged mirror panels the walls. Smudged mirrors paneled the walls. Alex stepped inside and clicked the B button. The basement was his favorite place in the entire apartment building. It was spooky and weird and packed ceiling high with towers of knickknacks left behind by former tenants. Like a graveyard for unwanted items. The most amazing part, however, was the boiler, an iron monster built 60 years ago. Alex called it Old Smoky. It was his destination tonight. The elevator doors closed, and the car began to descend in slow, jerky increments. Alex tapped his foot impatiently. Though his backpack was far lighter than usual, it seemed to weigh him down like an anchor. I'll feel better after they're gone, he thought. Just toss them in the flames and walk away. Don't even stick around to watch them burn. Of course, Alex could have just dumped the contents of his backpack down the trash chute and been done with it, but that seemed cruel. Cremating them in Old Smoky felt more honorable, like setting the body of a fallen warrior aflame. Alex figured he owed them a good death, at least. After all, he was the one who had created them. The elevator stopped. The doors creaked open. Alex tilted his head in confusion. Instead of the basement, an unfamiliar hallway stretched out before him. He checked the digital display at the top of the elevator. 4. Must be broken, he thought, jabbing the B button with his index finger. The elevator didn't move. Alex sighed with frustration. Ugh, Looks like I'm taking the stairs after all, he thought. He stepped off the elevator and headed towards the stairwell. The 4th floor had the same basic layout as the 8th, but it was noticeably darker. Alex glanced up at the light bulbs, wondering if a few of them had burned out, but they seemed to be working fine. For some strange reason, however, their glow didn't radiate as far as it should, as though the darkness of this particular hallway was harder to penetrate than any ordinary kind. Just my crazy imagination, Alex thought, ignoring the cold sensation creeping down his spine. The bulbs are probably just old or... He heard voices. They were coming from the apartment at the end of the hall. At first Alex thought it was just the people who lived there. As he got closer, however, creepy music rose in the background, and Alex realized that the voices belonged to the characters from a movie. He broke into a big grin as he recognized the dialogue. That's Night of the Living Dead, he thought. Alex had been 4 years old the first time he saw the movie. He was supposed to have been asleep, but the strange sounds coming from the living room had piqued his curiosity, and so he had crept out of the bed to investigate. His mom and dad were cuddled up on the couch sharing a bowl of popcorn. Alex hid behind his dad's easy chair and trained his eyes on the television. He had never been so terrified or exhilarated in his entire life. By the time his parents had realized they had an unwelcome visitor, it was too late. Alex was in love. At the end of the month, his Thomas the Train had been exiled to a bin in the basement, replaced by toy monsters, plastic fangs, and a stuffed ghost named Boo. He dismantled his Lego fire trucks and rocket ships and used the bricks to build a haunted house. At the library, Alex insisted on borrowing only the picture books with little Halloween labels on their spines, despite the fact that it was June. Night of the Living Dead had been his introduction into the world of creepy things, and for that reason it held a special place in his heart. Hearing it now, an overpowering desire to watch the movie again fogged all other thoughts. Alex approached the door of apartment 4E, the static-filled soundtrack reeling him in like a fishing line, and pressed his ear against it. It was one of the earliest scenes in the movie, just before Barbara and her brother are attacked by a zombie in the graveyard. I've barely missed anything at all, Alex thought with excitement. He had, for the moment, completely forgotten about his backpack and his reason for coming out tonight. All he could think about was the movie. He was desperate to see it. If Alex had been thinking clearly, he might have realized this didn't make any sense. After all, he could watch Night of the Living Dead anytime he wanted to on his iPad. Surely that was a better choice than knocking on a stranger's door in the middle of the night. Unfortunately, Alex was not thinking clearly. His green eyes, usually so sharp and inquisitive behind their glasses, had gone uncharacteristically flat, and his mouth hung open in a baffled expression, giving him a striking resemblance to one of the zombies from his movie. Alex knocked on the door with 3 quick taps. A woman answered almost immediately, as though she had been expecting his arrival. "Well, look at this," she said, peering down at him. "A visitor." The woman was in her late 20s, with dark skin and short, spiky hair. She wore all black, and a lot of makeup, especially around the eyes. "I'm sorry," Alex said, his mind swirling. "What am I doing here? I don't know why I knocked. I just heard—" "What did you hear?" she asked, leaning forward with an eager expression. "Tell me." "The movie." The woman smiled. There were tiny gaps between her narrow teeth, giving her the look of one of those weird glowing fish that prowl in the deepest part of the ocean. "A movie?" she asked, with genuine curiosity. "That's new. Which one?" Alex gave the woman a strange look. He could still hear the television blaring behind her, the zombie now banging on the window of Barbara's car, yet she was acting like she heard nothing at all. "Don't you know?" Alex asked. "Why should I? The movie's for you, not me." She opened the door wider. "Do you want to watch?" she asked. "I bet it's one of your favorites." A beam of fear cut through the fog of Alex's thoughts. It's the middle of the night, and I'm having a conversation with a total stranger, like it's the most normal thing in the world, he thought. What's wrong with me? He took a step back, intending to leave as quickly as possible, when he smelled something wonderful coming from the apartment. Freshly baked pumpkin pie. His favorite. He breathed in the comforting smells of nutmeg and cinnamon, and all his fear instantly evaporated. This woman isn't a threat, he thought. She's just a nice lady who likes horror movies, and like me. The movie's Night of the Living Dead, Alex said. 1968, directed by George Romero. Ah, said the woman. How intriguing. And was I right? Is it one of your favorites? Top 10, right between Let the Right One In and The Ring. Alex shrugged apologetically. I like scary stuff. You sound like my kind of kid, the woman replied, grinning. It's crazy. I was about to kick back and watch the movie. Then I thought, the only thing missing is someone to share this with. Someone who will really appreciate it. And here you are. She opened the door all the way, allowing Alex a view of a comfortable-looking couch and a coffee table piled with oatmeal raisin cookies and pumpkin pie. Across from this cozy setup, a huge TV played the black and white image he longed to see. Barbara staggering towards the farmhouse, where she should be trapped for the rest of the movie with zombies in hot pursuit. Alex took a step forward, entranced. Well, don't just stand there gawking, silly boy, the woman said. Come inside. Even later, when Alex knew that he had been under the influence of a powerful spell, he found it hard to believe that he had entered the apartment so easily. At the time, it was like his body was not his own, but a moth drawn to the flickering lights of the television. He crossed the threshold. The door clicked shut behind him. Gotcha, the woman said under her breath. She slipped a cold hand around his wrist, and all the energy seemed to leave his body. Alex sank into the cushions of the nearby couch, barely able to keep his eyes open. The woman eased into the chair across from him. The smile had faded from her lips. What's your name? She asked. Alexander. Alex. Which one? Alex, he said. He looked around the apartment in confusion. The television had vanished, along with the coffee table and pumpkin pie. Where did the TV go? Alex asked. It was never there. No, he insisted. I saw it. The apartment does what it can to get you inside. Different for everyone. A movie is an odd choice. Traditionally, it's some sort of food that draws them in. Kids are always thinking with their stomachs, you know. I smelled pumpkin pie. There you go. It was becoming harder for Alex to focus. The room kept tilting back and forth, like when you first step off the pirate ride at the amusement park. He felt like he might be ill. I want to go home, he said. Obviously, that's not going to happen, Alex. He turned in his seat, moving impossibly slow, hoping to make a mad dash for the door. Except the door had vanished. The place where it had once stood was nothing but a blank wall. Where did the door go? He said groggily. Away, the woman said. Don't worry, you won't be needing it anymore. But that's not possible, Alex said. Doors don't just... they can't... Haven't you figured it out yet? She asked, grinning with pride. I'm a witch, just like in a storybook. She touched a single fingernail to his forehead. And you, little mouse, have fallen right into my trap. Alex tried to stand, but his legs had turned to jelly, and he collapsed to the floor instead. A wave of darkness crashed over him. Chapter 2. The Voice at the Door. Alex woke up in the lower half of a bunk bed. He had no idea where he was or how he had gotten there. He lay perfectly still, his body frozen with fear. Gradually, the events of the previous night returned to him. The elevator, the apartment, the witch. Except she's not really a witch, Alex thought, his mind racing. Witches aren't real. She's just some crazy lady who thinks she's a witch. But then why did I see a TV that wasn't really there? Did she hypnotize me or something? Alex clutched his blanket as a question of more immediate concern popped into his head. Who's sleeping on the top bunk? He stared at the iron bars holding the mattress in place. Above him, listening carefully for breathing sounds. When he didn't hear anything, Alex slid to the floor and gently placed his foot on the bottom rung of the ladder connecting the two bunks. In one swift movement, he popped his head over the railing. There was no one there. Just an old mattress without any sheets or blankets. Alex let out a sigh of relief. Whew! I never knew a bunk bed could be so scary, he thought. The rest of the room was small and plainly furnished. There was a standing mirror in the corner and two doors. The first one Alex opened led to the closet, which was mostly empty except for some children's clothing hanging from the rod. Flipping through shirts, pants, and dresses of various sizes, Alex remembered something that the woman had said the previous night. Traditionally, it's some sort of food that draws them. Them, he thought, with a sickening feeling of dread. I'm not the first. Of course, if he accepted what the woman had said at face value, that meant the apartment was capable of reading children's minds in order to lure them with the appropriate bait. Like a smarter version of the candy house in Hansel and Gretel, Alex thought. In my case, a scary movie did the trick. He stared at the clothes before him. But what about these other kids? What brought them here? Then the smell of chocolate? A friend's voice? No, Alex said. That's impossible. There's no such thing as magic. He slammed the door shut with such ferocity that the empty hangers tilted together in response. Even if he rejected magic as a factor, it still left the disturbing possibility that he was just one of a long line of children who had slept in this room. And if he followed that train of thought to its final stop, Alex found himself facing an even more disturbing question. If he wasn't the first kid that she had taken, what had happened to the rest of them? Before his overactive imagination could supply any morbid answers, Alex crossed the room to the second door, nearly tripping over his backpack in the process. This door was normal in every way, except it had 2 keyholes instead of 1. The upper keyhole was the usual kind, but the second bore a strange crescent shape. Probably a special lock, he thought, to keep anyone from escaping. Alex was so certain that attempting to open the door would be a dead end that he gasped when the knob turned in his hand. She must have forgotten to lock it, he thought with a faint glimmer of hope. Sucking in his breath, Alex opened the door as slowly and quietly as possible. The next room looked identical to the first. Simple bed, single closet, standing mirror in the corner. Alex stepped inside, wary of squeaky floorboards, and gently shut the door behind him. The moment he did, the door vanished and became a regular wall. What? Alex asked, backing away in shock until he tripped over something on the floor. His backpack. It can't be, he said, shaking his head. That's still in the other room. After he checked the contents, however, there could no longer be any doubt. Either his bag had somehow teleported from one room to another, or something even stranger was happening. Trembling slightly, he opened the closet door. Children's clothes hung from the rod. They were identical in every way to the ones he had been examining just a few minutes beforehand. It's the same room, Alex said in astonishment. He opened the door with 2 keyholes and looked back and forth between the rooms, searching for the slightest difference. There wasn't any. He could even see the door open on the other side of the second room, and then an endless series of identical rooms beyond this, like reflections in a maze of mirrors. Curious what would happen, Alex lifted his backpack and watched its twin rise in the air like a prop in a haunted house. It's a magical prison, he thought. There's no way to escape. Alex shut the door and took a seat on the edge of the bed. The wheels of his brain spun madly, trying to process the giant wrecking ball that had just tilted his world askew. So askew means just slightly off, and so he's realizing some pretty wild things. Whew. Magic is real, he thought, his head in his hands. He stayed like this for a long time, until he was struck by a second idea. Rising to his feet, Alex screamed as loud as he could while jumping up and down and pounding his fists against the wall, trying to make as much noise as possible. Help! I've been captured by a crazy woman! Call the police! This place may be magic, but it's still inside a New York City apartment, he thought. Not some house in the middle of the woods. Someone will hear me. Someone will... The walls began to shake. As a lifetime resident of the East Coast, Alex had never experienced an earthquake. What he was seeing and feeling right now, however, floor vibrating, walls shaking, was just as he had imagined an earthquake would be. Terror squeezed the air from his lungs. At any moment, Alex was certain that the floor would crack open and swallow him whole, or the ceiling would collapse, burying him beneath a mountain of rubble. And then it was over. What was that? Alex thought. He fell to his knees and waited for his equilibrium to return. That couldn't have been an earthquake, not in New York. But then what was it? Alex heard a scratching noise and saw the doorknob start to turn. He had just enough time to notice that a key had been inserted into the crescent keyhole, not the normal one, when the witch entered the room. Why are you screaming? She asked. This apartment is enchanted. There could be an entire orchestra playing in the living room right now, and no one beyond these walls would hear a single note. She was wearing a flowing black dress with black boots and black lipstick. Her long black nails came to 10 sharp points. Around her neck hung a beetle encased in amber. It was black. She sure looks like a witch, Alex thought. All she's missing is a broom and a pointy hat. A dozen keys dangled from a ring in her hand. Some were the typical kind. Others were white and didn't look metallic at all. There was an earthquake or something, Alex said. That was just the apartment settling itself. It happens from time to time. Really? Alex asked. This felt pretty... The woman vanished before his eyes. Boo! She whispered in his ear, now standing behind him. Alex screamed and stumbled backwards, nearly losing his balance. That was amazing, wasn't it? The woman asked, looking pleased with herself. You want to see it again? Alex shook his head, unable to speak. She's a witch, he thought. A real, live, honest-to-goodness witch. Please let me go, he finally managed. The words little more than a whisper. I won't tell anyone about this, really. Alan, right? She asked. Alex. Not Alexander, the woman said, remembering. I'm Natasha. The thing of it is, I can't let you leave. Not now, not ever. Why not? Alex asked. And then in a voice that sounded impossibly small, he added, Are you going to do something bad to me? I'm a witch, she said. You're a child. We're not going to play checkers. Ever read any fairy tales? Alex nodded. Then, you know how it is. She sighed with exasperation. I really don't have any time for this today. I'm already late for an important meeting. Natasha looked him over, her eyes lingering on his stomach. She smirked. You don't look much like a worker. A few too many ice cream sundaes, perhaps. But then, what should I do with you? You could let me go, Alex suggested. Oh, Natasha said, you're funny. Unfortunately, that's not the same as being useful. Whatever. If things don't work out, I'll just add you to my collection. She brushed her hands together in a cleaning up motion. Problem solved. What does that... Natasha checked her watch and let out a high-pitched scream. Now you've made me even later than before. You've only been here a few hours and you're already a problem. Not a good sign, Alan. She slipped through the door and slammed it shut behind her. Alex heard the bolt click home. Without any windows by which to judge the passing of time, the hours smudged together, making it difficult for Alex to determine how long he'd been trapped inside the room. 4 hours, he wondered? 8? There was no use trying to escape. He'd been back and forth between the two rooms at least a dozen times. He didn't even bother screaming anymore. Alex believed Natasha when she said no one could hear him. After all, he had seen her vanish before his eyes and magically teleport across the room. Being able to soundproof her apartment didn't seem like much of a stretch. Alex cried for a while. He tried not to, but he couldn't help it. He felt cold and scared and alone, and a little disappointed. All his life he had loved scary stories, and now he was inside of one. It should have been fun. The problem was that the witches Alex had read about in books were story scary. This was real scary. It was a big difference. What is she going to do to me when she gets home tonight? Alex wondered. His imagination, as usual, leaped to the darkest conclusion. She might eat me, or boil me in a cauldron, or chop me up into ingredients for a spell. Gruesome images flashed through his mind, each worse than the last. Alex wanted to shut them off, but it wasn't as easy as turning a valve or flicking a switch. All he could do was wait it out. Finally, he heard footsteps. At first, Alex thought that Natasha had returned, and his heart began to drum in his chest. This is it, he thought. Only instead of unlocking the door, the mysterious visitor hesitated just outside the room. A long shadow stretched beneath the crack of the door. Hello? Alex asked. Is somebody there? He heard a faint breathing behind the door. Please, he exclaimed. She's going to be back soon. You have to help me. The silence stretched on and on. Alex was starting to wonder if his imagination was getting the best of him again when he heard a girl's soft voice. She liked stories. Floorboards squeaked as the shadow beneath the door retreated. In moments, Alex was alone again. Chapter 3. The Thing Inside the Backpack. So before we get to this one, if you have to predict what do you think's in his backpack, what was he going to burn up in the furnace, make a prediction, and we'll see if you're right. Alex knew he wasn't brave. He was terrified of roller coasters and pretty girls and losing his parents in a crowd. When other kids bumped into him in the hallway, intentionally or not, he always mumbled, "My bad," and kept walking. Even math tests made him sweat. Unfortunately, this was the type of situation where an unusual amount of bravery was required. Since Alex, by his own estimation, wasn't up to snuff, he tried to imagine what his big brother would do. It wasn't hard. John reacted to any sort of adversary with violence. They had a box full of broken video game controllers to prove it. He would have knocked her out the first chance he got, Alex thought. For the most part, Alex considered his older brother a walking meathead, just a few IQ points north of a zombie. But a John-style approach seemed like his best bet. The moment that Natasha returned, he could shove her to the ground, grab her keys, dash out of the room, and lock the door behind him. I'll have to surprise her before she has a chance to cast any spells, Alex thought. That's the only way this will work. He pressed his foot against the leg of the bed in a sprinter's pose, his entire body angled towards the door. Every so often, Alex stretched his muscles or cracked his neck, but other than that, he remained still, imagining that he was a soldier on sentry duty. So sentry's a lookout. Finally, the doorknob turned. Alex charged. Natasha entered the room, raised her eyebrows at the sight of his lumbering body, and waved her hand dismissively. Alex felt something clutch his ankles with an iron grip, and then his feet left the floor as he was yanked backwards. After a painful landing, Alex looked behind him and saw the legs of the bed wrapped around his ankles like vines. As he watched, they withdrew and solidified into their previous shape. Natasha stared down at Alex with a look of resignation, like he was an errand that could no longer be put off. A dirty floor, an empty refrigerator. "My meeting went great," she exclaimed, as though Alex had asked. "New customer placed a huge order, willing to pay double for it. Isn't that spectacular?" Despite his predicament, Alex was curious. Story witches cursed newborns and spackled houses with sugary treats. They didn't run businesses. "An order for what?" he asked. "What do you think? Magic-infused oils, of course. Huge market for it. A hex for that annoying neighbor, extra luck for a weekend getaway to Atlantic City, and love oils." She rolled her eyes in disgust. "I am so sick of love oils. Then again, business is business." Alex forced a smile. If he couldn't escape, he figured that he could at least try to stay on her good side. Oh, so that kind of reminds me when we read the Jumbies, how she was talking about her magic potions, how there were some for love that people always wanted. Can you remember that? "Congratulations," he said. "That's really great." "So sweet," she said, patting him on the head. "Unfortunately, since everything here is running so well, I don't want to throw any new cogs into the machine. If it ain't broke, don't fix it." She raised her hands into the air, and they began to glow with blue light. "Just be a doll and stand still, and whatever you do, don't close your eyes. Like a photograph." Natasha lowered her hands towards Alex's shoulders. He trembled with fear, knowing that there was nowhere to run, nothing he could do to stop her. "I just want to go home," Alex thought. "I just want to see my family again." Suddenly he remembered what the girl had said. It was a long shot, but he had no other ideas. "Do you want to hear a story?" he asked. Natasha paused, cocked her head to one side. "What kind of story?" she asked. "Scary." Regarding Alex with skepticism, she flicked the blue light from her hands. "Interesting," she said. "I wonder." She shook her head. "Nah, you're just a boy. What kind of scary story can you know? Something you read in a library book? Heard around the campfire? I have no use for the same old tales." "You couldn't have heard these," Alex said. "I made 'em up." "That's even worse," Natasha snapped. "I need real scary stories, not lame kitty tales." Alex flushed with anger. "My stories are scary," he exclaimed. "Too scary. That's why I was going to burn them all up last night." "That doesn't make any sense," she said. "If your stories are as good as you claim, why would you destroy them?" Alex remained silent. His storytelling instincts told him that he should hold back on the details for now. Once Natasha knew everything, she wouldn't be interested anymore, and if he wanted to survive, he needed to keep her interested. "Fine," she says. Natasha clapped her hands together, and a shadowy chair rose from the floor. She eased into it and stared at him expectantly. "Tell us a story. Let's see what you've got." Alex picked up his backpack with sweaty palms. "What are you doing?" Natasha asked. "My nightbooks are inside," he said. "Nightbooks?" "The journals I write my stories in," he said. "I have trouble sleeping. Bad dreams. The only way to get rid of them is to write them down." "Nightbooks," Natasha said. She smacked her lips together as though tasting the word. "I like that." Bending down on one knee, Alex unzipped the front of his backpack and withdrew a marbled composition book with his name printed neatly on the front. Which story should I read tonight, he thought. There were dozens of possibilities in this night book alone. Alex knew that if he picked a bad one, he wouldn't get a second chance. Something short, Natasha said, growing impatient. An appetizer to see if I want a steak for the entire meal. Alex spread the night book open, flipping through the pages with shaking hands. Finally, he settled on something that he thought might work. If she doesn't like this, I'm a goner, he thought. He started to read. So we have a title! The night book, and his night books are his journal, and any part that we're reading a story by him in the text is written in kind of this handwriting, like a different handwriting font on there. And that's one of my favorite parts about this book, is that it goes from his story to like this one where we get to experience what was in his night book. So here we go. Lost Dog. The first time that Greg saw the dog was at his best friend Eric's house. The two boys had been hanging out all day, and after finally getting bored of video games, they went outside to throw the frisbee around. The dog was sitting on the front porch. It was a medium-sized animal with mangy white fur, like an old undershirt that had been worn one time too many. Neither boy recognized the breed. "Hey there," said Eric, bending down to scratch the dog's neck. The dog didn't wag its tail. It stared up at Eric with sad eyes. "Must be lost," Greg said, keeping his distance. His mother, who had been bitten when she was a girl, had always warned him to stay away from strange animals. Checking the tag, maybe he belongs to one of... Check the tag. Maybe he belongs to one of your neighbors. Eric inspected the tag on the chain collar. It was shiny black, a shiny black triangle without any name or address. "Weird," said Eric, pinching the strange tag between his fingers. "Feel this. It's cold as ice." "I'm good," Greg said, backing away. The dog was looking at him with those sad eyes. Greg couldn't say why, but he suddenly wanted to get out of there as quickly as possible. "I'm heading home." The next morning, his parents sat him down at the dining room table and gave him the tragic news. There had been an electrical fire while Eric and his family were sleeping. None of them had survived. A year passed. Greg was still sad when he thought about Eric, but not as sad as he used to be. One day he was walking home from school when he passed the Wilsons' house. The lawn hadn't been mowed in a while, and the mail was overflowing from the mailbox. No one held these things against them. Their daughter Renee was sick. Not stay-at-home from school sick, but the bad kind that required overnight stays at the hospital. A white dog stared out at him from the Wilsons' front window. Until that point, Greg had forgotten all about the lost dog that he had seen at Eric's house the day of the fire. Now the memory came rushing back. It can't be the same one, he thought. Can it? He crossed the lawn to get a closer look. The dog sat as still as a statue and stared back at him with sad eyes. The black triangle dangled from its collar. Greg ran home. The next morning, his mom got a phone call that made her break into tears. Renee Wilson had died in her sleep. After that, Greg started looking for the white dog everywhere he went. He never saw it. Eventually, he became convinced that the dog had just been a figment of his imagination. One beautiful summer day, Greg went to an amusement park. They had just built a new roller coaster. It was one of the tallest in the world, and Greg had been waiting all year to ride it. At first, his mom had said no. There had been stories online about some safety concerns, but Greg finally talked her into it. He waited for hours to get the front seat. As he pulled the shoulder harness over his chest, he knew that it had been worth it. The car climbed the hill ever so slowly, higher and higher and higher. Greg looked down and gasped at how small the people had gotten below him. He grinned. This is going to be great, he thought. There were tiny steps along the side of the track, just in case a worker needed to get up there and fix something. At the very top of the hill was a small platform, just big enough for someone to stand on. The white dog was there, watching the coaster ascend. Its eyes looked sadder than ever. Sunlight glinted off its triangular collar. Greg knew that the dog's presence could mean only one thing. "Stop the ride!" he shouted, struggling against the shoulder harness. It was too late. The roller coaster was already plunging down the first drop. All around Greg, people started to scream. Woo! So it's back to the regular part of the book. Alex closed the night book. Natasha stared at him for a long time, eyes narrowed. She hated it, he thought. I've blown my only chance. You really wrote that? She finally asked. Alex nodded. You sure? Natasha asked. Maybe you read a story that you liked in a book, and you copied it down, told everyone you were the real writer. I would never do that, Alex insisted, his anger for now overriding his fear. It's my story. I can even tell you where I got the idea. My friend found this dog one day, and I got to wondering, what if the Grim Reaper had a pet? Natasha raised her eyebrows in amusement. Most kids would have just thrown the dog a ball and called it a day, she said. That's other kids, Alex said, twisting the Nightbook in his hands. They play with dogs. I play with what-ifs. I wish I could be more like them, but it's not something I can control. No, Natasha said with a knowing smile. I imagine not. She continued to stare at him, absent-mindedly, tweezing a strand of shadows from the arm of the magic chair and spooling it around her index finger. Ooh, that's a fun image. Like she's kind of like fidgeting and the chair's becoming shadows. Can you make a picture of that in your mind? Did you like it? Alex finally asked, hating the uncertainty in his voice, his need to know. He rarely shared his writing, but when he did, his hunger for immediate feedback bordered on desperate. Wrong question, Natasha said. She rose from the shadow chair, which dissipated into the air, and pressed her ear against the nearest wall like a safe cracker. What are you doing? Alex asked. Shh. Natasha listened closely. Finally, she nodded with satisfaction. Good, she said. Yes, that will do. What will do? Alex asked. What are you talking about? The witch ignored him and opened the door leading out of the room. Alex caught a glimpse of an ordinary-looking hallway. Sleep well, storyteller, Natasha said, just before leaving the apartment. Tomorrow, your real work begins. She locked the door behind her. Oh my goodness. So, fun book. We're going to keep reading it. I'm just going to take a brief stretch. So if you've been just listening to this whole thing together in one shot, maybe take a stretch. Remember, if you make any art, share it with me. I want to see it. Okay, Chapter 4. A Room of Dark Wonders. Alex was awoken by the sound of his mom and dad in the kitchen as they made a big breakfast together, just like they did every Saturday. Voices, laughter, the clatter of pots and pans. The moment he opened his eyes, however, the noises vanished. It had only been a cruel bridge between dreaming and waking. I'm not home, Alex remembered, orienting himself. I was kidnapped by a witch. He closed his eyes, not ready to abandon the relative safety of his bed, and thought about his family. Who discovered I was missing? Not his brother John. He had to catch the early bus on Friday. Not his dad either. He was never the first to rise, clinging to those final moments of sleep like a life raft. It must have been Mom. Alex pictured her walking into his room and seeing his empty bed. She wouldn't panic, not at first. She would just assume that he was already up, probably eating breakfast or using the bathroom. Soon, however, she would notice that Alex's bag was gone, at which point she would call the school to see if he had taken the early bus for some reason. When they tell her I'm not here, Alex thought, that's when it'll hit her. That's when she'll wake up Dad. Alex wondered if they called the police yet. He imagined his parents holding hands on their couch, talking to a man in a blue uniform, dutifully taking notes on a small pad, and felt such pure love for them that he had to fight back tears. This is all my fault, he thought. If I hadn't snuck out in the middle of the night to get rid of my Nightbooks, none of this would have happened. Then again, if I wasn't such a stupid freak who wrote stupid, freaky stories in the first place. Alex opened his eyes. Thinking about the past wasn't going to help. Right now, the most important thing was to remain calm and figure out a way to escape. The greatest apology he could give his parents was to return home safe and sound. Thus resolved, Alex sat up and promptly banged his head. Bunk bed, he thought, clasping a hand to his forehead. I forgot. The mattress above him squeaked as something shifted its weight. Hello? Alex asked, frozen. Someone there? No answer. Heart hammering in his chest, Alex backed across the floor until he reached a vantage point that allowed him to see the upper bunk. There was a massive orange lump lying on the mattress. Green eyes watching his every move. What is it? Alex wondered. Some kind of monster? He grabbed a lamp and raised it over his head, just in case the creature decided to slither down the ladder and attack. While he waited, Alex took a closer look. He burst into laughter. You're just a cat, he exclaimed. It was, in fact, the fattest cat he had ever seen. Its fur was pumpkin orange with just the slightest hint of dark stripes. black fur encircled and accentuated its piercing green eyes. The cat's most unusual feature, however, was a long tail that arced straight into the air before spiraling into a neat question mark. "You look like a cat that ate a raccoon," Alex said, "or a monkey, or both." The cat, who hadn't moved from its spot on the top bunk, seemed unamused by this assessment. It gazed down at Alex like a queen from her throne. "I didn't realize Natasha had a pet," Alex said, putting the lamp back and climbing halfway up the ladder. He reached up and stroked the cat beneath its chin. It did not purr or show any signs of pleasure whatsoever, but rather bore his touch like some kind of foul-tasting medicine, best swallowed quickly as possible. I love that. That's such a good description of a cat that's not in the mood to be petted. "You're not the friendliest thing, are you?" Alex asked. "That's okay. Glad to have any company at all." He scanned the room, curious how the cat had managed to slip inside, and received his second surprise of the morning. The door with the 2 keyholes was open wide. Instead of providing passage into an identical room as before, the doorway now opened into a large hallway. "This is crazy," Alex said, repositioning his glasses on his nose as though that might change what he was seeing. "What happened to the other room?" He directed his question towards the cat. It wasn't that he expected an answer. It was just comforting to talk to another living thing. The cat, however, did not seem eager for companionship. It looked back at him with a condescending expression. "Stop talking to me. I'm a cat." "Okay," Alex said, feeling a giddy rumbling in his stomach that was equal parts nervousness, excitement, and good old-fashioned hunger. Time to explore. He walked down a dimly lit hallway, passing a single door to either side of him. They each had 2 keyholes, regular and crescent-shaped. "They're probably bedrooms," Alex thought, thinking about the layout of his own apartment. Maybe one of them belonged to the girl whose voice I heard. He considered knocking, but didn't want to risk waking Natasha. Instead, he stood perfectly still and listened carefully, hearing nothing. After a brief moment of hesitation, he tried turning the knobs. Locked. At the end of the hallway was a small bathroom. There was no crescent keyhole in this door, and Alex was relieved to find it unlocked. He entered the living room. The furniture was expensive old, the red wallpaper patterned with black flowers. If Alex had not already met the apartment owner, he would have assumed that she was far older than Natasha, for this was a grandmotherly type of room. Not the nice sort of grandma who pinched your cheeks and baked chocolate chip cookies, but the creepy kind who rocked back and forth while knitting sweaters for dead children. Fancy display cases lined the walls, their shelves filled with mysterious objects that looked like they were on loan from some museum of dark magic. Alex saw wands resting upon silver pedestals, black jars with intriguing labels such as "Last Breaths" and "Vampiric Ashes," horrific masks that seemed to watch him as he passed, tomes are like a book, whose spines had been embossed with unrecognizable symbols, and an entire display case packed with crystal balls. "Cool," Alex said. Most children would have been frightened by such witchy paraphernalia, but Alex, who constructed his own Halloween advent calendar every October 1st, was fascinated. "What does this thing do?" he wondered, bending down to look more closely at a mummified hand. He supposed that he could have been more frightened than ever, since Natasha's impressive collection suggested that she was a powerful witch indeed, and yet Alex couldn't keep the grin off his face. Creepy things were awesome. On a nearby shelf, he saw a fancy black chest about the size of a shoebox. Until this point, he had resisted the urge to touch anything. Just because he thought the objects were wonderful did not mean he was ignorant of their potential dangers. At the very least, they looked valuable. Natasha would probably turn him into a frog or something if she caught him touching one. Still, his curiosity gnawed at him. What's in the chest? Maybe something amazing. The most amazing thing at all. "Hello?" Alex called out, testing the silence. "Natasha? Anyone home?" No one answered. Even the cat was nowhere to be seen. "Okay," he said, stretching out his hand towards the chest. "I'm just going to take a quick peek." Something hissed past him, or behind him. Alex froze in place, and then slowly looked over his shoulder. The orange cat was glaring up at him. It had appeared seemingly out of nowhere. "Where did you—" Alex started, and then swallowed the rest of his sentence as he took in the cat's menacing pose. It had looked harmless enough just a few minutes ago, but not anymore. Its back was arched, its fangs bared to return to predatory roots. Alex, uncertain what had caused this change in the cat's attitude, was afraid to move, afraid to even breathe. Then he noticed that the cat's eyes were not on him at all. They were on the black chest, or perhaps his fingers just inches from it. He slowly withdrew his hand. The cat relaxed, its face returning to its default expression of bored superiority. "It's because I was going to touch the chest," Alex asked. "Is it off limits?" He found it hard to believe that a cat could be that intelligent. Of course, up until very recently, he believed that magic and witches could only be found in stories. There was clearly a lot he didn't know. No big deal, he thought, leaving the chest alone for now, and reaching instead for a straw doll a few shelves away. "There's plenty of other interesting stuff here." The cat hissed even louder than before. Alex snapped his hand back. The cat instantly relaxed. "You're like my own personal guard," Alex said, putting it together. "That's your job, isn't it? To make sure I don't touch anything I'm not supposed to touch?" The cat puffed out its chest, acknowledging Alex's theory. "Got it," he said, raising his hands into the air. "Look, no touching." In a way, he was grateful for the cat's intervention. The magical objects had been a distraction. He needed to look for a way out of the apartment. Alex decided to start with the most logical point, the front door, or at least the place where the front door should have been. Right now, it was just a wall. Must be a spell, he thought. Natasha can come and go through the front door whenever she wants, but no one else can leave the apartment. Wondering if he'd be able to hear any residents in the outside hallway, Alex pressed his ear against the wall. There were no voices, but beneath the wall's paper skin, he heard a rushing sound punctuated by rhythmic grinding. It was muffled and faint. Maybe it's the sound of the elevator gears grinding together, Alex thought. He remembered how Natasha had listened to the bedroom wall after he read his story last night. Was that the sound that she heard? He wondered. If so, why did she seem so pleased? He had no idea. In any case, the front door was a dead end for now. So Alex decided to check the nearest window. He expected to see downtown Flushing's, signs in Korean and Chinese, parked cars squeezed tightly together, piles of garbage bags waiting pickup. Instead, he saw a mirror image of the room he was standing in. "It's the same magic as the bedroom door," Alex said. "If I climb through the window, I'll end up back where I started from. How can I escape from a place that has no exits?" Feeling somewhat dispirited, he explored the rest of the apartment. The cat his second shadow. The floor plan was identical to his own home, so he knew exactly what to expect. A dining area, barely large enough to fit table and chairs, a washer and dryer unit tucked into an alcove, and 3 additional closets, pantry, linens, coats. In the small kitchen, 2 peanut butter sandwiches and a glass of milk waited on the counter. Alex had no idea if they were meant for him or not, but he hadn't eaten for nearly 2 days, and he gobbled them down. Compared to the living room, the rest of the apartment was surprisingly ordinary. 2 of the closets had crescent-shaped keyholes, in addition to the ordinary ones. But other than that, Alex didn't come across anything else with a magical vibe. There was one thing that gave him the creeps, however. In the dining room, an antique china cabinet displayed a collection of brightly painted figurines. They were all children, engaged in some manner of play. A girl skipping rope, a boy catching a butterfly with a net, a dozen more, tossing a ball, splashing in a pond, reading on a park bench. Alex was staring at the painfully wide smile of a girl riding a sled when he heard a scratching noise to his left. He spun around and looked through the archway that separated the dining and the living rooms. Someone was unlocking the coat closet from the inside. Impossible, Alex thought. I just checked that closet like 5 minutes ago, and there was no one there. It wasn't even locked. The key scratched again. It wasn't a metallic sound like a normal key would make, more like chalk clicking against a blackboard. It seemed to be coming from the crescent-shaped keyhole. It's Natasha, Alex thought, preparing himself. Does she know I've been snooping around her apartment? Is she going to punish me? The door swung open. Oh my goodness. I hope you are loving this book. I'm going to read one more chapter and then I'm going to stop because my throat's getting a little bit sore. Here we go. Chapter 5. The Other Prisoner. The girl who stepped into the living room looked as though she had risen from the grave. Dirt matted her hands and face. Stains splattered her brown apron. Dark goggles concealed her eyes. Alex, whose nerves were already at their breaking point, did what anyone else would have done in that situation. He screamed. What? The girl asked, looking behind her for the cause of Alex's terror, as though something far more horrible had followed her through the closet door. What is it? She removed her goggles. Instead of the red demonic orbs that Alex had been expecting, her eyes were big and brown, and staring at him with undisguised annoyance. Alex suddenly felt very foolish. Sorry, he said. I thought you might have been, I really don't. A zombie or something. The girl mulled this over. So like mull is to think. Good news, she said. I'm alive and a vegetarian. I think you're in the clear. The girl sighed with annoyance and brushed past him. Alex followed her into the kitchen, where she filled the glass with water at the sink and downed the entire thing. I was supposed to show you around this morning, she finally said, in the bitter tone of a teacher who hated her job. That's why Natasha unlocked your door, but you were in a majorly deep slumber, and I didn't feel like dealing with a grumpy new kid, so I let you sleep. The girl glared at him angrily, as though all of this had been Alex's fault. Had to start without you. Last thing I need is for Natasha to come home and see I haven't gotten all my chores done. You snore, by the way. I know. I could hear you through the door. Pretty impressive. That's not just any door, and you've probably noticed. That's a magic... Who are you? Alex asked, with more bite than he intended. The girl's attitude was starting to grate on his nerves. My name's Yasmin, she said. Not Jasmine. No J, E. People always screw it up, and it drives me crazy. I'm Alex. I know. I went through your bag while you were snoring away. Saw your name on those notebooks. Alex reddened. Despite everything that had happened, he still didn't want anyone reading his Nightbooks. You read my stories? He asked. Chill, Yasmin said, raising her hands in a pacifying gesture. I didn't read them. I tried to, but I gave up. You have the worst handwriting I've ever seen. Like, seriously, you're the reason typing was invented. But the books made me think of Shazarade from those stories my Sito used to tell me. Who's Shazarade, Yasmin said. From the Arabian Nights. She's the vizier's daughter, and she ends up getting imprisoned by this king with a habit of beheading his wives. In order to stay alive, she tells him a different story each night and stops in the middle. So if he has to keep her around to find out how it ends, she sighed at his look of incomprehension. You must have at least heard of the stories. Sinbad the Sailor, Aladdin, Ali Baba, and the... You're the one who came to my door yesterday, aren't you? Alex asked, finally making the connection. You told me that Natasha liked stories. That's probably the only reason I'm alive. You saved my life. Alex thought Yasmin would be happy to hear these words, but instead she flinched as though he had insulted her. Her expression, which had gone almost friendly while she talked about the Arabian Nights, hardened into its previous look of disdain. I didn't save anything, she snapped. You're still trapped here like me. So you're a prisoner too? Yasmin pulled the battered Met's hat from her back pocket and jammed it on her head. Nah, she said. I'm here on vacation. I thought that since you had your own key to the closet, you might be, I don't know, the witch's apprentice? He was about to add, but then he considered the girl's gaunt frame and haunted eyes. She's been kept here against her will, he thought, just like me. How long have you been here? He asked softly. Long enough, she said, picking up the empty plate on the counter. I see you found the sandwiches I made. Thank you, Alex said. I was starving. Good thing you like peanut butter, Yasmin said. I used it too. There's a giant jar of it underneath the kitchen sink. Some crackers and instant oatmeal too. Help yourself, but don't overdo it. Natasha isn't great about remembering to restock, our supplies at least. Yasmin opened the refrigerator door, revealing shelves that were jam-packed with expensive food. This, along with anything in the cabinets, is off limits. And don't think, she'll never know if I eat this one little chocolate. She'll always know. Lenore tells her everything. Lenore? Where is she anyway? Yasmin asked, looking around. Lenore, stop messing around. The orange cat suddenly appeared at Alex's feet, startling him. It can turn itself invisible? Alex asked in disbelief. It's a she, said Yasmin. And yes, she can vanish at will. Lenore gives Natasha a full report on her activities each day. Just assume she's in the room with you at all times, even when you don't think she's watching. Trust me, she's watching. Alex bent down and held out his hand, palm up, waiting for Lenore to approach him. She refused to acknowledge his presence. What are you doing? Yasmin asked. Trying to make friends. Lenore doesn't want to be your friend, she said. She's a witch's familiar. You know what that is? A magical servant, Alex said. I wrote a story once about a familiar that tried to steal its master's spell book. Well, tried to write it. Couldn't figure out a good ending. He bent down again, trying to meet the cat's eyes. I like your name, Lenore. It's like in The Raven. He looked up at Yasmin. Natasha must be an Edgar Allan Poe fan. He writes creepy stories? Oh yeah, then I'm sure she is, Yasmin said. Listen, this is fun and all, the bonding, but I have to get you set up so I can get back to real work. Set up doing what? Yasmin rolled her eyes, like an older sister saddled with babysitting duty. Just follow me. She crossed past him, back into the living room. Alex had to rush to keep up. Yasmin's walk was practically a run. The rules are pretty simple, she said, not even looking over her shoulder to see if he was following her. Don't touch anything, especially the magical-looking stuff. Don't try to escape. It won't do any good. And if Natasha finds out... She shook her head. It's not worth the risk. Where is Natasha? Alex asked. Yasmin shrugged. Out and about, I guess, selling her oils. She usually comes back around dinner. I cook, by the way. You clean. Yasmin stopped at the door to the linen closet and withdrew a small ring with 3 white keys, like the ones Natasha had. Alex thought, getting a good look at them for the first time. They were far more complicated than normal keys. Each bit had been carved into an intricate pattern of notches and swirls. Alex reached over to touch the key pinched between Yasmin's fingers. It was cool and perfectly smooth. Are these carved from bone? He asked. Yeah, Yasmin said, yanking the key away. And don't ask me where the bones came from. I don't know, and I don't want to know. She slipped the key into the crescent-shaped keyhole. It refused to turn. Stuck again, she muttered, shaking her head in frustration. It was clear she wanted to get rid of Alex as quickly as possible, and this was just another roadblock. Why do some doors have 2 keyholes? Alex asked. Well, Natasha can hardly keep the magical rooms out in the open, Yasmin said, jiggling the key back and forth, just in case the super or someone comes poking around, so she hides them. The regular keys lead to regular places. The bone keys, on the other hand. The key turned with a satisfying click. Yasmin pushed the door open. Alex gasped. He should have been looking at a tiny closet, barely deep enough to hold an assortment of sheets, towels, and blankets. Instead, he stepped into a circular chamber that resembled the interior of a lighthouse. A narrow wooden staircase wound upward in tight spirals past hundreds of book-lined shelves, the ceiling a barely visible dot in the distance. This can't, Alex said. The room spun. Alex bent over and trained his eyes on the floor. The floor was real. The floor made sense. It's some sort of trick, he murmured. No trick, Yasmin said. Just magic. When Alex didn't reply, she spoke again with a hint of sympathy. Give it a minute. It's hard to get your mind around it at first. The idea that a room can be bigger than it ought to be. You're used to walls and ceilings meaning something. Alex grappled with this wild idea, trying to hold still. For a reason not immediately clear to him, he flashed back to something he had learned in language arts at last year. Good stories, Mrs. Coral had said, built their own worlds. Even that might seem crazy or unlikely in reality can make perfect sense within the right context. That's called interior logic. Alex remembered the feeling of excitement bubbling within him as he giddily copied the words in his notebook. Interior logic. It was like being given permission to imagine anything he wanted, as long as he built the right fence to contain it. Same thing here, he thought, finding a way that he could make sense of all of this without losing his mind. Magic rooms are impossible in the real world, but inside a witch's apartment that lures its victims with classic horror movies, not so crazy. Interior logic, he whispered. Alex cautiously looked up again. The room was no longer spinning, but the floor still felt as if it was rocking beneath his feet. Taking deep breaths, Alex tried to anchor himself by picking out specific details that proved he was standing in a real place. Book spines of all shapes, sizes, and colors. Dust motes falling like snow. The musty smell of pages begging to be turned. Finally, the room settled into place. His disorientation changed to excitement. It's a library! Grinning now, Alex walked over to the nearest shelf and read some of the titles. The Empty Classroom and Other Creepy Stories. Night Dreams and Daymares. Tales to Whisper in Little Ears. They're story collections, Alex said. Scary stories, Yasmin said. Every book here. Alex whistled. craning his neck to take in the rows of books spiraling all over his head. How many are there? He wondered. 5,000? 10,000? Natasha really does like stories, Alex said. You weren't kidding. She makes me pick out a new book every night and read her a bedtime story, Yasmin said with clear distaste. Some of them are good, some not so much. Either way, Natasha always seems disappointed. I think she's read all these books already, maybe more than once. She's dying for something new. Yasmin gave him a crooked smile. And, ta-da! Here you come, the answer to her prayers. Her own personal story machine. She nodded towards a simple wooden desk in the middle of the floor. It was empty except for a jar of pencils and a fresh pile of lined paper. This is where you'll be working, Yasmin said. Every day, from morning to night, writing as many stories as possible. Lenore suddenly appeared on a stool in the corner, giving her a perfect vantage point of the desk. The meaning in her cold green eyes was clear. And I'll be watching you to make sure you do what Natasha wants. This is crazy, Alex said. Totally, Yasmin said. But do it anyway. Natasha's serious about this, Alex, and you don't want to cross her. Besides, sitting in a nice comfy chair all day making up stories, it could be worse. Alex looked at Yasmin's dirt-encrusted nails, the long scratches on her arms. What does Natasha make you do? He asked. Yasmin started to say something, then glanced over at Lenore, as though unsure how much she should share. That doesn't concern you, Yasmin said. She turned, meaning to leave, but Alex blocked her path. He lowered his voice to a soft whisper so Lenore couldn't hear him. There has to be a way out, he said. If we work together. Yasmin pushed him away. Have I given you the impression that we're friends? She asked. Because we're not. She eyed Lenore, who was watching the conversation carefully, and we're definitely not going to try to escape. But, Yasmin jabbed her finger into his chest. No but. No nothing. This is your life now. Forget your family. Forget your friends. Focus on making yourself useful to Natasha. She met his eyes, warning him. Write your stories, Alex. Entertain her. That's the only way you'll survive. Alex didn't love this idea. After all, his Nightbooks were what had caused all this trouble in the first place. But right now, he didn't have any other plan. How long did telling stories work for Scheherazade? Alex asked. 1,001 nights, Yasmin replied. That's a long time, he said. I'd go crazy before then. Yasmin gave him a grim look. Don't worry, she said. I doubt you'll last that long. Oh my goodness. So I'm going to stop there. My voice is giving out. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you guys later. Bye.